Thank you so much for joining us this afternoon. This is the sixth annual Lit Fest that I am delighted to welcome you all to. I'm Jennifer Acker. I'm the director of the festival and editor of the Common magazine. A couple of housekeeping things before we get started. I need to tell you that this event is being recorded, and the recording will be made available on the Amherst website in the next few days or so. I also want to note that the books by the LitFest authors who are appearing throughout the weekend are for sale from Amherst Books, which is our local independent bookseller. And if you are joining us from the webcast page, there should be a link to the book purchase page below the video image. And if you're joining us directly by Zoom, we can put that purchase page directly in the chat, which is already there. So if you've been thinking about a book by an author, please do buy it. For those of you who would like to take advantage of live closed captioning, if you go to the webcast page, amherst.edu/go/webcast, the captions will be appearing there during the event. Amherst is celebrating its bicentennial this year, which is very exciting. And there are a number of treats for book lovers, including 3 special bicentennial books and something called the Solidarity Book Project, which is a community-based expression of art and activism through books, which is the brainchild of Professor Sonia Clark. You can find out more and participate by clicking on the link to the bicentennial from the LitFest homepage. Finally, I want to thank President Biddy Martin for supporting LitFest from the beginning and being such a lover and promoter of literature at Amherst, and also my wonderful colleagues on the LitFest Planning Committee. And so this year, for the first time, I'm delighted that LitFest will offer the opportunity to get a taste of not only creative writing by authors who have published books and are renowned for their works already, but we're going to hear from the next generation of critically acclaimed writers, which is Amherst brilliant students. All of today's readers are either current or former interns at the Common. We're going to begin with Isabel Meyers, who is actually not a student anymore, graduate. She graduated last year. Izzy is the Common's inaugural literary editorial fellow, and we'll begin with her in 1 second. At the end of the event, I hope that you will stick around for the next event by Amherst brilliant alumni authors. We'll have a quick break in between the 2 events, so you can grab yourself a drink and then come back at 5 for our cocktail hour reading. So without further ado, we will move right on to Izzy Meyers.
Hi everyone, I'm Izzy. I'm, as Jen said, the Literary Editorial Fellow this year, graduated last spring. And today I'll be reading from the beginning of my creative thesis, Something Else You Should Know, which is a historical fiction novella interspersed with bits of memoir. On Coincidences. On my grandfather's last birthday, my parents saw my face for the first time. It was in an envelope sent from the adoption agency containing a wallet-sized photo of me taken in a rural area of Hunan, China. My face is tiny and my body is wrapped in some sort of blanket, creating the illusion I'm just a head floating on a sea of fabric. According to my mom, Grandpa thought it was a good omen that they received the picture on that day, like there was some sort of connection between us. Me coming into the family just as he was preparing to leave it. He must have known that he wouldn't get much time with me. This was after years of surgeries that worked surprisingly well, chemo that worked surprisingly poorly, and countless trips in and out of rehabilitation centers. My mother always told me how happy I made him the first few times we were together, and how glad he was to stick around long enough for 3 photos to be snapped of me sitting on his lap, the only ones that prove we met. Chapter 1. Walter was sitting in the rocking chair, gently smoking a cigarette and flicking through a manuscript when he heard the shuffling of beat-up Oxfords. When Stanley walked in, he tossed the pages to the floor, where they fluttered among dozens of other marked up papers. Along with being on the short side, Stanley had shoulders that drooped when he stood, creating the illusion that he was older than his 32 years. His mousy brown hair was flattened on one side, and Walter wondered if he had worn the ancient felt hat that he had been vowing to replace for years. Well, someone's back late. Did the company party go better than you expected? Stanley went to the kitchen to pour himself a glass of water before returning to the living room. It was fine. You can't seriously expect me to believe it lasted until, Walter checked his wristwatch, 2 o'clock in the morning? I walked around the city a little. Why are you still up? What could possibly be going so wrong for Dick and Jane? Stanley said irritably. Walter's smile faded. Nothing. I just got some feedback from the author of the farm animal book. He wants to change the sheep character to be a pig now, even after I explained to him the cover art's already done. And what about your book? The one you started working on, Stanley hesitated, during that blizzard last winter. Walter swallowed. It had happened again. One of them had gotten sloppy late at night and dug up a memory from before. It'd been over a month since he had sat Stanley down at an empty cafe in the East Village to tell him they were over. And even now, as leaves began to fall onto the grimy city sidewalks, neither could quite bring himself to look the other in the eye. New York waited for no man to emotionally or financially resolve a 2-year-long relationship, and certainly would not provide a reasonably priced apartment for one to move into. So they continued to cordially wish each other good day in the morning, cooking separate dinners in the same kitchen, and having these strangely intense nightly talks. Thank you. The next reader is going to be our Thomas E. Wood Fellow, Elly.
Thanks so much, Izzy. That was wonderful. Hi, everyone. My name's Elly. Like Izzy said, I'm the Thomas E. Wood 61 Fellow here at the Common. I'm going to be reading, excuse me, I'm going to be reading from my thesis, which is a speculative fiction novella. What you need to know as context for this scene is that it takes place at a high school diving tournament, and the whole novella is set in a world where mental illness and mental anguish and trauma also manifests physically. The next girl was climbing up to the short ladder leading to the board. I could see her hands gripping the bars as she rose. But then a coach walked up and said something to her. She climbed back down. The crowd started to murmur. It took me a moment to realize what was happening, but then the coach pointed at the water and it hit me. The last girl still hadn't gotten out of the pool. I stepped closer to the fence and scanned the surface of the water. There was a shape turning beneath the bright blue. She was moving, but not swimming. What was going on? What was happening? The lifeguard jumped in. He cut through the water with swift, powerful strokes. The noise from the crowd grew from murmurs to shouts. A few of the divers walked up to the edge of the pool and stared in. I wondered if the girl's parents were there. The lifeguard's head ducked beneath the water. All I could see were 2 thrashing shapes. An alarm went off on my phone. The bus was leaving in 5. I ignored it. Splash. The lifeguard's head and shoulders broke the surface. He was clutching something to his torso, something that was writhing and screaming. The girl. But her skin had turned dark blue. The noises coming from her didn't sound human. There were low-pitched shrieks and snarls, gravelly like an old dog's growl. And when she jerked to the side, I saw something sticking out from the side of her neck. I couldn't see from where I was at, but a kid in the crowd in front of me could. Are those gills? He asked the guy next to him. The answer was drowned out by a splash as she fell back into the water. She sped away from the lifeguard, a dark shape coursing from one side of the pool to the other. The lifeguard was a tall, muscular man, and from the precision of his strokes, it was obvious he knew what he was doing. But he couldn't catch her. She was too fast and too agile. She slipped around him whenever he tried to grab her. This went on for about a minute, and then a coach jumped in, fully clothed. It took a while, but with the 2 of them working together, they managed to corner her. When they grabbed her, she screeched so loud I could hear it above the water. I shivered. It was worse when they hauled her out. She wouldn't stop screaming. The sound was inhuman, but it was clearly the high, shrill noise of someone in pain. As she thrashed in their arms, I saw webbing between her fingers. Her scales glistened in the fading light while they pulled her away. Thanks, and next up is going to be Whitney Bruno.
Thank you, Elly. Hi, I'm Whitney. I am a senior, and I'm going to be reading a brief excerpt from my thesis. It's a short story collection that's loosely based off my father and his siblings' stories of immigrating to the US from a small Caribbean island called St. Croix. And so the story that I'm reading from follows James, who's the eldest sibling. He's a college student settling into a Massachusetts private school. So I'll go ahead and read from that. A capitalist economy, James is answering. Just outside, from where he can spot through the window and in his periphery, his eyes catch on a red-orange tree that borders the immigration office. He tracks the gentle, steady movement of a leaf that's brought away with the breeze. Then he realizes he's distracted, even if for just half a second he might have missed what she'd said, and immediately jolts his attention back to the blonde USCIS official who sits at the desk across from him. Her bob moves as she turns to type on her desktop, her fingernails clicking with precision on each clunky key. Good, good, Margaret, according to her name tag, says. Over the brim of her horn-rimmed glasses, Margaret asks him about United States territories and then about the Revolutionary War. James sweats through both answers, his hands practically numb from where they're anxiously tucked beneath his thighs. As the only one of his siblings who'd been born outside of the US territory of St. Croix, when he was a toddler, his parents had upended their quaint lives in Dominica for better opportunities. The naturalization process has been something he's extensively dreaded in a way the rest of his immediate family doesn't have to. He wonders if Margaret can sense his nervousness now, or if, perhaps, he's reading too much into her rigorous command of her own desk space. Sounding especially bored, she asks after another moment, what movement tried to end racial discrimination in this country? Tried to, he thinks wildly. He nearly bites his tongue. The civil rights movement. Margaret gives an affirmative hum. Her keyboard makes more clicking noises. And what is one promise you will make when you finally become a US citizen? To give up loyalty to other countries, he replies. The proper responses from the printout study guide he'd labored over for hours in his dorm just regurgitate out of him like nothing. He doesn't even have to think about them. He just wants to be right. To be loyal to the United States. That's excellent. She smiles a little then, essentially the first real semblance of emotion she's shown throughout the whole interview. The fluorescent office lights above her cast dark shadows on her pale face. He tries not to fixate too much on them. And here's the last one, Margaret announces, turning back to him with her meticulously manicured hands clasped. The idea of self-government is in the first 3 words of the Constitution. What are those words? A draft gradually sifts through the small room. As though he is outside of his own body, James is suddenly watching himself form the beginnings of the words, watching his lips wrap around the shapes of them, from someplace else, from someplace far away from the USCIS office, from across the Atlantic Ocean in a different world. Thank you. And next up will be Sofia.
Thank you, Whitney. I am Sofia, junior editorial assistant with The Common, and I will be reading from a sequence of poems that was published by The Common as a poetic dispatch from Amherst. Homily, hemiola. The upper air is slight, full of sounds, rising and falling like gnats in the warm wind. They catch the unsustaining offshoots of the setting sun. Stasis, a false presumption, dispatched. These wafts, imperceptible by the extant senses, disappear when we look for them. Just as the Andromeda galaxy spinning towards us fades into a cloud when we search for its guiltless face. A cosmic pileup, 4 billion years to live. A quiet fear grows in me like a seedling. Time in Amherst moves too slow, too fast, at an odd angle like light caught in a mirror. Clocks tap hemiolas against earthly rhythms. Sometimes a deep beat in a distant room reverberates with no context, a sacrificial ritual moving closer and closer, like our own valediction to this place. Did its gold leaf crumble? Did the oil run out, leaving gaping doors and apertures? Uncanny valley, but for place, not person. I think I got it too good. 7 o'clock in the evening, looking out to the plush upholstery of the woods to the south, white spring beds and carpeted hallways. Is someone going to take this away like an unfinished dinner plate in a polite household? Moreover, I know I will leave different than I came in, but I don't know in what way. Like going under a timber truss bridge, some unknown evolution taking place, pebbles and macroinvertebrates passing through a stream, bold, naked, altered but unawares, save that they passed, the cold torrent rushing their bodies. So will I, wade among the pine needles, savor the mulch smell, as the distant drum gets closer yet, gulping the saturated air from heavy skies. Thank you, and up next is Eliza.
Hi, everyone. I'm going to be reading from an essay that I published. I'm a junior and an editorial assistant at the Common. And I'm going to be reading from an essay that was published in the Common this summer called As I Live and Breathe. And it's centered really around 2 locations. One is MD Anderson Cancer Center. And that's where my mother's student, Sydney, died a couple of years ago. And the Houston Holocaust Museum, which is a really personally sacred place for me. I passed by H.A. Jim's garden monument towards a newer exhibit, a gallery housing dozens of paintings by Samuel Bach, one of the many Holocaust survivors who settled in Houston after the war. I'd forgotten how many of his paintings are about childhood. It is obvious how deeply the intensity of Bach's own childhood experiences of death affected his work, animating paintings of young boys in various states of precarity. My favorite is a piece titled Studied for a Decca. It depicts Isaac collecting the wood he will be bound to, the Adeka, the binding, by his father, Abraham, before he is to be burned as a sacrifice to God. A masked symbol of death embraces Isaac from behind as a ladder rises toward the sky. This is Isaac's education, his study. He too learns best when he is held by death. On my way out, I stopped by the theater. On screen is a Houston survivor I'd seen speak before. Mercy, she said, is protecting someone's ability to live and die on their own terms. Violence is depriving someone of that right. I've no doubt that Sydney died with as much mercy as possible under the circumstances. MDA has wonderful counselors and spiritual advisors. Her family screened messages those final months, filtering out the ones asking her to keep fighting, to be strong. They gave her a safe place to rest. I do wonder, though, how much mercy any of us are allowed in this oil city where free particles of benzene, an extremely carcinogenic compound, hang in the air like the bullets of angelic warfare, where cancer lived chemically in the early thrum of oil and industry before civilization did, where denial exists under the guise of righteousness or of care, monuments to this righteousness standing steepled and gleaming on every other street corner, where there is still no listed support group for the terminally ill at the nation's premier cancer center. I tell my mom about the subject of this essay while we sit on our apartment balcony, looking out over the Exxon plant that built our town. She takes a deep breath. It was really hard after the funeral, she said. There was no one at home who knew Sydney, no one to talk to about her death, and I needed to talk about it. When a young person dies, you can't take anything for granted anymore. It reminds you that people do bury their children. I know this is an ultimate fear of hers, being a mother of 4. She said before that if any of us were to die, you might as well bury her too. But if my mom gets her way, that means that one day I'll have to bury her, a thought that I don't like to entertain. But still I ask her, what do you want to happen? When you die, I mean. We talk for I don't know how long about her evolving spirituality and my more stagnant beliefs, about quality of life and the point at which she would prefer to cease medical treatment. We also talk about how hard this conversation is, how terrifying it is to acknowledge in the clear way, not that oh yeah way, that all security in living is illusory. My mom's greatest confrontation with this fact was the death of her brother, Anthony, a young Navyman who died in a car accident when I was a baby. We cry, grieving for ourselves, for Anthony, and for Sydney, a small mercy. And next up is Olive.
Hi, my name is Olive. I am a sophomore and I'm also an editorial assistant at the Common. And I am going to be reading from an essay that is forthcoming that I've been working on the side of my intern work. It's called On Accumulation, and it's about reading the book Housekeeping. By the time I got to Marilyn Robinson in the middle of August, we were packing weekend bags, and I read Housekeeping from the window seat of a friend's house in upstate New York. The place had wide windows in the main room and all the nicest pieces from the IKEA catalog. I lay in a patch of sun, halfway immersed in the damp, dark world of Robinson's finger bone, but breathing the deep green and deeply familiar air of the mountains. My mother sits on a bench by the side of a riverbed and an old photo taped to the wall of my childhood bedroom. She's looking up at my father, who's behind the camera, smiling. They were young when they first went up to the Catskills, first for weekends in the rundown Valley View Hotel and later to a small cabin they bought just down the road in the town of Olivria. The house was yellow, with lavender shutters, a rusted swing set, and mossy stepping stones on the lawn, and just beyond the clearing there was forest, thick and beautiful and divided by branches of the Esopus Creek. In one of my most vivid memories of being in that house, I'm 10 and standing barefoot at the edge of one of those branches with my hiking boots in one hand. It's a freezing winter afternoon and I'm gathering the courage to wade back through the stream because the roots on the trunk I'd crossed earlier are too thick on my side to climb. The sun has begun to set behind the bare trees, and beyond a bend upstream, I see smoke rising from our metal chimney. I wonder if I'll make it back before dark, and think for a moment it might be okay to stay by the stream, to sleep on a pile of leaves left over from the fall and listen to the river work its way over the rocks and all the way back to Brooklyn. Then the wind blows, and I run. There's a scene in Housekeeping where Ruthie and her younger sister Lucille spend a night outdoors in the forest. They leave the house during the day, prepared with fishing supplies, thick boots, and bagged sandwiches, but wind up too far in the woods to turn back when night comes. They lie side by side, silent and listening to the forest and lake settle around them. And then early in the morning, they follow the water and the railroad tracks back towards their house. Their Aunt Sylvie waits for them outside, reading National Geographic like nothing has happened. She makes them brimstone tea. It's their first moment of transience, where a boundary between inside and outside, house and world, care and deep, sheer solitude falls away. The quote I keep on my wall with the photos, written in purple pen and stuck in my head most of the time, comes just after. Loneliness is an absolute discovery. Thank you.
Sorry, little trouble unmuting there. Thank you, everyone. Let's just thank all of our students for reading. One more round of virtual applause for all of our wonderful interns. It's such a pleasure to hear the things that they've been working on.